So welcome everyone to the session. You'll have to move for me to be able to read it. This is the ABN AMRO Global Markets Beyond Legislation. Subtitle, Building a Data-Driven and Agile Foundation. Thank you for attending. Just a couple of housekeeping notes real quickly. You've probably heard me say this a million times, but again, if you haven't done it, download the app and please complete the survey for this session. If you complete the survey, you'll be enrolled to win an Amazon gift card, potentially. So there is an incentive to do so. Secondly, mute your phones out of respect for the speaker. If you do have to take a call or anything, please go out in the foyer, in the back room. And then lastly, questions and answers. We're going to do questions at the end, but if for any reason we don't get to your question, you can consult with Edwin directly afterwards. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer your questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who will introduce our speaker today. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a micro. I got one. I need two. So good afternoon, everybody.
Hello.
You are all so perky after lunch. I can only assume it was the baklava. Did everybody have baklava? Yeah, the baklava is pretty good, right? Yeah, Maureen's eating hairs as she speaks. Good afternoon, as I say, and thank you for coming to this session. You can probably tell from my accent that I'm English, and Edwin, who I'm joined with today, is, say hi, Edwin.
Hi.
Well, if you could tell, he's not English.
No,
Edwin is...
Likely not.
Edwin is actually a South African working in the Netherlands at ABN. And the reason why the English guy is introducing the South African working in the Netherlands is because we've been working together for a couple of years now at ABN AMRO Bank. And Edwin's a smart guy. He's a solution engineer. It's been a pleasure working with him for 2 years now and hopefully continuing for another couple of years at least. He's going to talk to you today about how they've been using MarkLogic to drive their business forward with an original implementation that they spoke about on MiFID II implementation that was spoke about at the previous MarkLogic World, but actually where they've moved on from since then and what the future looks like for those. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Edwin. Take it away, Edwin.
Perfect, thanks Chris. Hi everyone. So today I'm going to very much focus on, we'll be moving towards our operational data. Like Chris already indicated, last year I spoke more around what we did for regulation and specifically MiFID. I don't need to do a quick introduction because Chris already did it, but my main focus within ABN AMRO and Global Markets is specifically around data and how we can use data within Global Markets to help our business grow as well as do the regulatory part and in a bigger function of the bank is how do we provide in data on to the consumers outside of the context of Global Markets. Okay, starting with our journey, I just want to quickly ask how many people are from the financial industry knows a bit about Global Markets? Hands up. Okay, because I've got a couple of slides starting just to explain what we do in Global Markets, and that will help that I can actually spend a bit more time on those. Normally when I explain to my friends, and I explain to them, listen, I work in Global Markets, and I ask, okay, but is it the place where everyone shouts? I said, no, that's not Global Markets, that's the stock exchange. And we don't always shout in Global Markets. I think some people already said there is a bit of shouting in Global Markets, but we don't do shouting in Global Markets. So what we do is, within Global Markets, we mostly focus around the customer facilitation. And we do it in two types of markets. The one, as you can see, is the primary market, and the other one is the secondary market. To split it up a bit, the primary market is typically where we create new types of capital instruments for our clients. So it means that it's not something that's already in the market. We're going to create with our clients something that we're going to put onto the market. The first one, I'm not sure if you can read it, but the first one is focusing specifically on equity, so the equity capital market. And that's where we'll typically work with companies that need capital. And then we will help those companies do research and then also help them get listed on the different stock exchanges to get capital from their equities. The second one is the debt capital market, and it's more for organizations, and sometimes also government institutions. And the idea here is that we will go to the market and create in a debt instrument. And it's typically something like a bond that will sell in the market, and then different customers can then buy that bond and use as securities. But while they use it as a security, they can also generate income from it. Very important is that this primary market and the secondary market should not know anything about each other. Otherwise, if certain information leaks from the primary market to the secondary market, then it's seen as insider trading. And that's very important why we need to split it. In the secondary market, we sell a number of products or help facilitate a number of products for our customers. Starting with typically your FX products, it's the most famous one, where you take, for example, a conversion from US dollars to euros. And with that, you also get different varieties of FX. One is, what I can quickly explain as the forwards one, is if you're a travel agency and you're booking a lot of trips in Europe, you don't want to take the risk of currency fluctuation. So you'll peg your currency into the future, that you know in that period that at least you don't have that risk of currency fluctuation. That's what we normally do in terms of FX. Fixed income, we help our customers to invest also, and especially treasury part of companies, to invest in fixed income, and that's they normally use for security. And let's say, for example, they buy in those products, they generate some income out of those products, but when they need to get rid of those products, when they need the actual capital again, they want to sell those liquid assets off again, and that's what fixed income is. Equities, I've already spoken about it, that's shares. We also deal in commodities, certain interest rates deals as well, where you swap it from a fixed rated instruments to variable rated or vice versa. And then we also do certain deals within the money market. But very important is that all those products can also be created in very special ways, and that's where the options and swaps comes in. So I can swap an FX product for an interest-based rates product, and it can get quite complex, those messages. So the whole product setup, it's very flexible. It's not like a mortgage loan or a typical term loan. And ultimately, we as a bank, when we start doing those transactions, we also need to hedge our risk against the market. So that's where we'll then go and create a position every day, and then also buy a product from a different financial institution to make sure that we also balance out the risk, and especially the risk in terms of market fluctuation that can happen. If you typically look then at the data types, and the idea is not to read all the details on it, but data starts normally from market data itself. So you've got a number of vendors that provide this data, and this data is all fed through a trading venue. And the typical data that you'll get is, if you see the one in red, it's pricing data, so tick data. And tick data comes through very fast. It's a number of ticks per millisecond. And that's a lot of data that can be generated. And a tick data is normally what is the sell and buy prices for different types of currency pairs, between euro and dollar or euro and South African rands. And those things change all the time, and that's a liquidity provider that provides the data. But we also got a number of other data that's more static data, and that's all these instruments, the equities, the stock, all those things that I spoke about. Those things need to get registered, and those things are on the open market. But in order to sell those products, you also need to have the data of those products. So from the market data, it then goes into front office. Front office will also then link onto certain exchanges or trading facilities. And in these trading facilities, we as a bank will then deal with our customers. The customers will come and say, we want, for example, to exchange 100 million US dollars to euros. Who can help us? And they put out a quote there. And within that facility, we would then offer, also provide certain firm quotes based on pricing models that we calculate. So if we need to take this risk, we would then give you exchange rate of XYZ, for example. And also what we will do is, when we provide those orders, we will also do certain market and credit risk calculations to make sure that we don't take on more than required risk for this type of deal. You also get more over-the-counter type transactions, which you won't do in an exchange, and that's more in a dealer networks. It's more smaller companies that you would work with. But at the end, once a customer accepted the formal quote, it will then go into our trading system, and in our trading system, the whole life cycle of this trade will run. So if the trade only matures in 6 months' time, every day we would then do certain market and risk calculations. We would calculate again the exposures, the valuations of all the products that we took on. Because again, the market changed all the time, so we need to, on a daily basis, calculate what is our exposure towards the market. And also those transactions, we need to send through all the confirmations, payment instructions, settlement instructions to the customers to make sure that the bilateral agreement is taken care of. And then ultimately, all this data also need to be fed through a number of these functions within the bank. So that's more the functional type of data. And that's the regulators. So, and then some of the regulators are end-of-day reporting, quarterly reporting, but the more famous ones like MiFID and EMIR, it's all real-time or near real-time based reporting. It should be within 2 to 3 minutes after you've made the trade. It should flow through. And then further on, you need to provide data to finance and risk in terms of a group function. And then lastly, there's also product control that needs to make sure that all these checks and balances are in place and the evaluations are correct. And what we report from on a finance perspective is all aligned and in place. And very important is that the whole lineage part of this needs to be traced. So when we send this data through to a regulator, they can ask us at any stage, what was the price at that stage when we sold that specific product. And we also then need to send this data to other market vendors to say, how did our price against some of our competitors? And did we not take advantage of the client? So it becomes quite difficult and tricky that you need to have close to millisecond type data coming through, end of day data, these trades happening on different venues. And it's just not one venue, there's a number of these venues, and you need to make sure that you keep this full lineage part of it. So that's where we started realizing we needed a different way of working. We needed a way where we can actually speed up how we do certain things. And as you already know, the banking world is very competitive. We get chased by a number of companies that's looking for the same customers, the same market space as us. Also, in the meanwhile, there's a number of change in legislations and regulations that's coming all the time. You need to be updated. It's one of those things, it's not a nice to have, but it's a must. We also, as a bank, want to keep up with the latest technologies, because that will also enable us to do things a lot better, a lot faster, a lot more simplistic. And it can also help us serve our customers in different channels a lot better. And also linked to that is our customers is rightfully expecting a lot more from us. Moving away more from the manual functions, digitization, providing them the ability to link data and also merge data in different fintech type applications where they can see the profile across different banks, across different portfolios. I've already mentioned the cost pressure, and lastly, there's a big drive within global markets. It's around simplifications, because the more simple our environments are, the more agile we are, and the faster we can deliver. So a couple of years we came up with a number of key criteria to what we wanted out of an operational data store. The first criteria is, as we said, we don't want to go through an environment where we need to do this massive, big upfront design again. We wanted something where we can bring in the data, we model what we need now, and then later on, if we need more, we still got access to the raw data. We also said, if we want to position operational data store, we want to remove all the direct dependencies between providers and consumers within global markets. So we don't want the source systems and the trading platforms and the market data to send all this data to all the different consumers that I've explained in the earlier slides. Also, what we want to do is that once we've got the data, we want the ability to provide different types of reporting, different type of analytics on top of it. And we don't want to do those analytics in the trading platforms or the back office systems. We want the data, and all the data It's also debatable, but as much as possible of the data needs to move into the operational data store, where we can do a lot of the reporting and analytical offloading. We're also looking for a technology where it works with documents. So the whole global markets and markets in general is a document-based systems. So it's XML, JSON, and we were looking for a place where we can actually place documents and not take a document and break it down into multiple pieces and then insert it into a relational database. But another criteria is now we've got all this raw data, but we wanted a central place where we can put our own ontology and our own way of how we want to expose the data to the outside world. So where we can actually model what we need in a language that we understand. So no industry type language like FPML or ISO or FIX. It's a language that from our business perspective, if they look at the data, they can actually understand the data. If you start doing a self-service BI on top of it, they actually understand the data. They need to understand the semantics and the value ranges and the ontology of the source system. They only need to understand one semantical language. What we do see very important is that there's different types of consumers. So and that's why we need different delivery modes. So certain consumers doesn't want the raw data, but there's also certain special needs, and where our data scientist comes in, where they also want to work with some of the raw data. And there's a very special need for that, and that type of model we also wanted to support. But if we convert or transform our data from raw to economical model that is totally different from the raw format, we need to make sure that we keep the lineage. Because part of the regulations and part of our obligations as an operational data stores, we always need to prove how we got from the raw data to the new harmonized or an ontology model that we've created. And lastly is the security part. So within the bank, and what I've already explained earlier on, you've got your primary and your secondary market. Those people should not see each other's data. Also within global markets, you've got different desks, and each desk will sell different types of products, and they should also not see each other's data. And also what we want to do is that certain data is also GDPR sensitive, so that you also want to try and protect. And that's where things like the attribute and redaction and all those kind of things will come in. So we started a bit of a cleanup within global markets. So one of the first things we said, technical decoupling. So we want to move away from where providers and consumers talk to each other. We wanted to move all these multiple lines that was floating around between the source systems and the consuming systems. And a lot of the times when you talk to these trading platforms, you ask them what they do. They say, no, we're developing this extract for that consumer and that extract for that consumer. We've set up 21 or 22 message cubes to send data out real time. And that's the thing that we wanted to stop. So no more direct communication between consumers and providers. So technical decoupling is very important for us. But the problem is you don't really get true decoupling if you only break down the technical decoupling, because then you still need to understand the each and every source system's ontology, the value ranges, how they store the data, where's the best places to get the data. So another big criteria that we put on is the functional decoupling. So how we implemented the functional decoupling is to say that we bring in the raw data, we create our global markets harmonized model, and this is what you're going to consume. So you don't need to worry about the raw data, you consume it. So as we change trading platforms in our back office side, no one should need to know about it. We can take away different types of systems, we can go to new market vendors. The consumer of the data at the end of the day should not care about the different format data coming in. They only consume our global markets harmonized model. And it's very much the same as this pastries that you see here. At the end of the day, we as a consumer that eats the nice pastry, technically don't always care where the sugar and everything that goes into this pastry is coming from. But also, if you go and talk to the chef at the back, he can explain to you, okay, this is how we made this pastry, we ordered this pastry from this and this vendor, and that's where the lineage part is very important, and that's what we also need to keep. And also, if the chef decides he's going to buy his sugar or cinnamon from a different vendor, it should not impact us as consumers. But now we've created both the technical and the functional decoupling. And now the question is, how do you distribute the data? A lot of organizations still works in a batch type way where data at the end of the day is moved in bulk from one place to another place. But there's normally 3 types of patterns that you need to support within a typical global markets environment. So again, let's start with the concept of I've got a provider and a consumer. Within global markets, we also got providers and consumers, and we've got providers and consumers outside of global markets. So this is where MarkLogic plays a big part within global markets. So we place MarkLogic between the providers and any of the consumers inside global market as well as outside of global markets. Then what we do is we bring in the raw data from the different platforms, as I explained earlier, from market data right through until the trade, so that we can get a full trade view and a customer view of all the trades that our customers done, all the deals that's available, all the products that we've sold, and we can look at this data from different types of angles. So we still got the raw data that we save as is. Then what we do is we run a harmonization process. It works a bit different than the Data Hub framework. We've got a different pattern, and that's where we also work with Stallion and Chris on the financial blueprint. So we use a different way of doing it, but it's more or less the same that you can see as the Data Hub framework. We then make a new copy of the data in our new ontology, again with the lineage between the two. And the main reason why we do it is that now we've got 2 separate data sets. So what we can then do is our harmonized data we can put on fast storage for consumption purposes, and the raw data we can put on a bit slower storage for just recording purposes. Now we've got the data in MarkLogic. From there on, we can distribute the data via a number of entry points within MarkLogic to our Power BI, MicroStrategies, and those BI applications. We can also distribute this data onwards to the bigger enterprise. So within the bigger enterprise, we've also got a raw data store, and that data, the harmonized data, we move outside global markets, and then all consumers outside of global markets, if they want batch data, they can get it from the raw data store of the enterprise. And then, like I also indicated earlier, in special situations, we also allow certain of our consumers only within global markets to access the raw data for slicing and dicing and analytical purposes. That's the one pattern. The other pattern that we're moving towards is also an API-driven global markets, where we expose via a number of REST services our data to the outside world. So if it's talk about open banking, FX APIs, those things that we'll want to expose to our customers, to the fintechs outside of the bank, would all run via services. And those services will use then the same ontology, the same language that we expose within the global markets harmonized model. So from a consumer perspective, is that if I work with the harmonized data in a bulk fashion or the harmonized data in a services factor, the ontology is precisely the same. So value ranges, ontology, everything is precisely the same. This also allows us to use the same services within global markets to create also another level of loosely coupledness and request response type fashion, as well as right through the group. And the last pattern, which I feel is a more important pattern, is the streaming pattern. This is where we will use, so at this stage we're moving over now, we're still on message queues, but we're moving over to Kafka. And the idea here is that we pop all the business events onto the streaming platform, and then from there on we consume it within MarkLogic, we harmonize it in a couple of milliseconds and push it back onto Kafka, onto a new topic for consumers within global markets and outside of global markets to process these messages in near real time. And so you can do these near real time type of analytics, Or if you want to do credit type calculations or risk calculations, you can also do it now in real time. Again, without needing to understand where this originated from. Again, in our ontology. We also do allow certain applications which are very, very sensitive in terms of latency. If we publish the data in a fixed format or a standard format, that it's still then allowed to providers and consumers to then access it. But if it's in a source system specific format, then that's not allowed. This same model that you see here, that we do within global markets, is also copied in corporate credits, trade finance, and mortgages. And that's where MarkLogic has got currently about 4 implementations within ABN AMRO doing the same type of setup. To make this also successful is all this metadata that we capture around the raw data, the harmonized data, the lineage part, who is consuming this data, to who are we sending this data, all that information is also fed up across the bank to a central metadata application. And the main idea around that is that if a consumer then comes and say, I want to access FX derivatives, instead of the consumer needing to know that that data comes from, for example, Murex, he would search in a metadata application and say, okay, this data comes from global markets. Here's the harmonized data that I can access. And via the lineage that I also publish, I can see that this data technically comes from Murex, and it comes from the following attributes within Murex. So you've got the full lineage and searchable capability to search across the data within the whole enterprise. Also in this catalog, you can then identify who's consuming what type of data and which type of format. So when there's questions again of, is someone using my data, then you don't need to go and send emails and meetings and 6 months investigation projects. You can actually just go to the metadata and understand who's consuming what type of data and which type of format. Drilling a bit more into what we do within global markets, and specifically to MarkLogic. Again, we've got a number of source systems coming in. We've got a number of consumers asking data. So what we do is we ingest the raw data, we harmonize it, we create a new copy of the data, which is a harmonized model. We make sure that within our catalog, we keep record of all the collections, all the documents that we use, all the metadata, the triples, at the end of what is our domain model, what is the relationship between all those models. So all that information is kept, otherwise we can't send it to the central meta model. But we see the data being delivered in 2 types of scenarios. So the one scenario is typical information delivery, and then you get 2 types of consumption. So one is more for reporting purposes, so it's more the descriptive analytics. So what did we do? So what did we do yesterday or last year, etc. And then also a bit of diagnostics analysis. So I can then start slicing and dicing my data and say, okay, but why did it happen? On the other side, we can then also have a number of data consumers in different types of formats. And that's also what I explained earlier with finance and risk and the regulators and product control, etc. That's the normal data delivery pipeline. But the pipeline that's becoming a lot more interesting is more on the data analytics part. Because what you want to do is that you want to move to an environment where self-service BI must be a natural thing. So people should not go to source systems and Excel to try and get access to data and slice and dice data. They should actually go to MarkLogic and just hit one of the REST endpoints in already a harmonized ontology, pull it into Power BI, and start slicing and dicing. It was very interesting when we started with the self-service BI. It was like, it's going to be too difficult. And then the first time we installed Power BI and we showed the traders how to slice and dice the data. Now there's so many questions coming to our Atlas team that they can't keep up with it anymore. It's like, can you maybe do this and this? And we want maybe this type of data with it. And can we look at maybe chats and linking chats to it? Because it gives then the trader and the end user the capability to actually find his own insights. So we as a the development teams doesn't need to provide the insights anymore. We actually just enable them to provide the insights. But it also then provides us then more capabilities in terms of quantitative analysis, machine learning, artificial intelligence, as well as continuous intelligence. That's also a hot topic these days. But also very important is that if all these things were very easy, we within global markets would have been very rich. You can't predict the market. Unfortunately, the market is not like people, where people are just, we all are people of nature. So we've got certain habits, and we're very easy to predict. The market itself isn't that predictable. And that's why you need to have not only these kind of things, but also a number of these specialized engines that can look at data, learn from that data, and give some advice, or look at the data and say, okay, you need to hedge X amount of money against these and these exchanges due to the following types of products that you sold to customers today. And it's a lot more specialized than also just MIBI. So, but you get the idea is that with the data analytics there, you can actually do data analytics across the raw data as well as the harmonized data. To help us orchestrate this everything, we also use Apache NiFi. And if you look at these kind of diagrams, it always looks very linear, data just flowing in and data going out. But in reality, that's not the case. It goes more like this, and then back again, and then back here again, and it's a lot more complex. And that's why you need a tool like Apache NiFi to help you orchestrate it. And not just the orchestration part, but also keep the data flow lineage. So we talk a lot about the data lineage, how you get from source to target, but the data flow lineage is also sometimes forgotten. So where did you get this data from? And which processes did it go through before you deliver it out to the consumer? So also the lineage outside of MarkLogic is quite important to capture. And then also monitoring. So we use App Dynamics. And with App Dynamics, we then have the ability to, in real time, also monitor our resource capacity. So how's our services currently being used? What's the performance of our servers? And a nice thing also then what we can do is we can say, this is now one release. We baseline this release. If a new release then comes through and the performance is deprecated, then we can also pick it up with App Dynamics because we can baseline our performance checks. And you need these kind of tools to make sure that you can provide a full cluster of manageable services. I always end all my presentations with a bit of lessons learned to see what we went through when we built our operational data hub. So some of the do's and don'ts that we can run through. At the end of the day, data is chief. You need to understand your data. If you don't understand your data, no technology at the end of the world will help you solve those problems. We've seen it in our teams as well when we approach data-orientated only with technical solutions or technical analytics, that doesn't really solve it. You need to have someone that understands the data, that understands the business, the subject matter expert that works close with those teams. Someone that really can dig into the data and explain where is the good parts of the data. A number of times what we've done also, what we've seen is we would start a quick experiment, and that quick experiment then becomes a production application, and then people sometimes get emotionally connected to those production applications. And it becomes very difficult to get rid of them. So for us, it's also experiment early with the patterns. MarkLogic is a very powerful tool, and you can spend a lot of time doing nothing in MarkLogic if you don't focus on getting your patterns right. NoSQL, and especially the way that you work with data, being document store with the graphs and the harmonization process. It's a new paradigm. When I went to university, I didn't learn anything about NoSQL. It was all about Oracle and relational models and how you need to model using Data Vault to load data parallel. And if you talk to a lot of the technical guys, they're still very fixated with relational databases. And you need to still keep on communicating what's the reason why we want to go with a document store and what's the benefits around it. Because people quite often forget what we want to achieve at the end of the day, the bigger, longer picture. Training. So training is very important. you need to make sure that the skill level of the guys are focused on needing to understand what MarkLogic can actually do and what's the benefits of MarkLogic. Because what we've also seen in a number of our projects is that if someone battles a bit with MarkLogic, they quickly write something around it in Java. And that's the last thing that you want to do. Work closely to the data. So rather get the guys trained and work closely with the MarkLogic consultants, that you always make sure that the right stuff is done and within MarkLogic. And very important is also the tools. Try and use as many as possible tools, especially with the Data Hub framework that's also came out. Use as much as possible tools, not to get blocked down in the technical ability and technical coding. Rather enable more data engineers to get from source to target, because that's the guys that understands the data. So enable more non-programmers to get to your end state. And that's where tools are quite important. I'm not saying remove all technical people. You still need that technical people for other functions, but enable the non-technical people to actually help you model the data and get from source to target, because that's the guys that understand the data. One thing that we also picked up very early in our life cycle of when we set up MarkLogic in our operational data store, it very quickly became a black box, because you load data in. Data is a document format. We were still on MarkLogic 8. We didn't have any ODBC connectors, anything that you can link to Power BI. And very quickly, people start realizing it's just data going in, and then we send data to regulators, but no one really knew what's inside. We didn't keep the data catalogs going. So make sure that when you start setting up the data, you're bringing data, set up those catalogs, build reports around it, show visibly what's coming in, what type of data do you have in the data, and start connecting something like Power BI very early on in the program. Another tool that worked very well is something like NOE. NOE can natively connect to MarkLogic in its document XQuery format. And with a tool like NOE, you can very quickly get data. You don't need to go and do any TDEs or ODBCs. You can actually access the raw data directly. When you go from source to target, stay away from Excel. And that's also a bit linked to the tools. And what we've seen with our MIFID project as well is that what will happen is that the analyst will go and say, okay, this is how source data looks, this is what MIFID expects, the regulator expects the data to look like, and they will start typing it in Excel. And then later on, I'll hand it over to the developer, and the developer will start coding it. And then the tester will pick up something, and we'll send it to the developer will fix it, but the Excel spreadsheet never gets updated. So rather from day one, work out what's your target that you move towards, and use the tools. The tools should be the live place where you keep all these mappings, never Excel. One thing that we also experienced is that in the beginning, and it's all again being a new technology, new way of working, is we battled to get that initial increase within MarkLogic, but it's literally just in the beginning. Later on, it becomes a lot easier, and it will accelerate it a lot earlier. But for us also in the beginning, it was a bit of getting everyone up to speed with MarkLogic and trained. It does take a bit of investment for MarkLogic to get actually MarkLogic going within an organization, like ours, for example. Also touched base already on don't use solutions for experiments. And lastly, MarkLogic is not a dumping ground. So don't expect just you throw swamps and swamps of data into MarkLogic and expect a magic. Again, it's all, you need to understand your data. Data is important. So work with your data. Make sure that you work still structurally well engineered with your data and not just throw it over the fence. I'm not sure how it did in terms of time. Still 20 minutes. So if there's any questions, you're more than welcome to shoot through.
Questions for Edwin?
So you mentioned the data catalog.
Yeah.
What did you explain how that is? That what platform, or is it a Java app? What is that built on?
So what we do is at the end of the day, everything is at the end still documents. So if we load in a document from a specific source system, we'll then create another document that contains all the definitions of what type of data that we load in, and we'll link it then to the original documents. So it's just an XML document that will say, this is all the attributes within that document. Attribute A means it's of this type of, there's a string, it means the following description, it's used in this context. So that's just metadata that you capture around your document. So that's what we see as the catalog.
Can you give an example of what tool you use for your source to target mapping?
Schematron. So we've got a semantical type tools called Schematron, which is an open source tool that you can use. And we use then Schematron to map from the source to the target. So when you run it through Schematron, Schematron will then produce a new output for you. Like I said, it's almost like the Data Hub, but it's just a bit different.
Other questions?
Hello.
Yes.
I told you 20 years ago I supported the database that you guys replaced, right?
Yes.
So when we had Sybase, we couldn't get MQ to work, and I think we finally got it to work. And then you made a comment earlier, we're getting rid of that MQ and replace it with Kafka,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Tell me what you gained from Kafka, because I have some customers still using MQ.
So the big problem with a message queue is that a message queue you can only set up between one provider and one consumer. So I'm talking about IBM message queues, just to be factual here. So meaning that if I want to send data from my source system to a consumer, I can only create one. I need to create multiple pipelines. So I'll create from the provider to each and every consumer. I'll create a different pipeline, a different message queue. So what we're busy doing now with Kafka is that we will publish one message, and then multiple consumers can then consume the one message. And the one other benefit with Kafka is that it will also keep track of which message which consumer already consumed. So if we publish a lot faster than what the consumer can consume it, the consumer can always catch up later on. And it also keeps it for X amount of days, etc., so you can replay. Yeah, so that's the main reason why we're going with Kafka.
I have another question about the ontology you said you are
Yes.
working with, that you've homegrown, more or less?
Yes, homegrown.
Right. Okay, so how do you maintain and develop that?
So what maybe just the journey how we started. So we looked at FPML and ISO and all the different standards on the market, and then we said, okay, this is not going to work because each one caters for different formats, for different types of products. And we actually went to our end users, our business users, and we started, okay, let's whiteboard. So if you want to ask questions, what type of questions do you want to ask from the data? And then we started writing it down. Okay, but what terminology would you use? And then we said, okay, so you won't use the same terminology as for example, FPML, but sometimes they also think that the terminology of the specific source system is sufficient for them. But the idea is that we first approach it from a business perspective. So how do you talk on a dealing room? And then we started creating different type of business entities from that. And that's how this whole harmonized or our homegrown model started. But we also use a bit of a composition technique. So we always say we start with a deal. And there's always between a deal, it's a contractual obligation between two parties and sometimes three parties. And what they do is they sell a product. And then from product, we go more specialized into it. But that all gets saved into one document. So that's, and if there's new questions coming out from consumers, then we just add it to the model and we add it into the Schematron transformation.
I was just wondering, initially when you were looking at use cases and you're trying to decide how to roll it out, I saw on your slide that you've got regulatory and business and operations,
yes.
But I was wondering which groups came on first, or what were the initial use cases?
Yeah, so it's unfortunately always the regulators comes on first. You always start with regulations and then you work it back. If I start greenfields, I would say never start with regulations, because the problem is with regulations, there's always deadlines. With deadlines comes shortcuts. So ideally, I won't start with a regulation. I would start with what is your business question needs, and then look at what is the questions that the regulation asks, and then based on that, start evolving your model. And that's a nice thing about something like MarkLogic. You can start with a very simplistic model, and then over time, start making it bigger and bigger.
Thank you.
But very important is that at the end of the day, you really want one single version of the truth. And that's one thing that gave us a lot of problems in global markets, because we were reporting in all these different silos. We had multiple versions of the truths between all the regulators and business. So for us, it's bring it together and actually communicate one version of the truth to regulators, to finance and risk, to business, so that you don't get those discrepancies between the reporting.
This is a comment. You made a comment about Excel, and then 20 years ago, I had customers using Excel.
Yes.
And they would get data from Sybase and put a Bloomberg add-in. Do
Yes.
they still do that?
No. Excel is known as, we've actually created a very special word for it. It's called shadow IT.
They love that.
Yeah.
They love Excel. You can never take Excel out. And they would put the Bloomberg ad, and that's their source.
No. So that's it. And so at the end of the day, people are like rivers. They're going to go where the easiest routes are, and you need to provide them the ability that they can still be a river and they can still find the easy routes. And that's where self-service BI was very important for us, is to create those APIs and those interfaces where they can still contain all the governance part, the security part. They can log in with single sign-on, but you give them the ability where they can slice and dice their own data. And maybe they use it in Excel, but the idea is that
don't give them Bloomberg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so far we use Power BI as our main slicing and dicing application now.
Any other questions?
You mentioned the inertia to get ramped up on MarkLogic. Was that a technical inertia, or was it an organizational?
Yeah, so it's more bit organizational. It's a lot of the resources that we have in the bank worked with Oracle and all the relational databases, and they can always solve it a lot faster than Oracle, which is true in the beginning. But they never look at the longer use case that we want to achieve. So that was the main reason, is that it's if you're used to a certain car and you drive it, and now you need to switch to something else that drives totally different, you always want to go back to what you know. And it's just a human factor.
Other questions? Okay, well, that's it. Thank you very much, Edwin, and thank you, everybody, for attending.